Victor Langston, a man who had built his empire from nothing, was known for one thing above all: his unyielding focus. At 57, his name was synonymous with success in the cutthroat world of real estate. Luxury developments, sky-high office towers, and sleek condos, his portfolio was vast. But there was no room for sentiment in Victor's world. Contracts, deadlines, and consequences, that was his reality. So when his property manager handed him the file, marked Unit 3B, 3 months delinquent, it was business as usual. Without hesitation, Vic tucked the notice into his coat pocket and slid into his black Mercedes. The drive was short, but his mind stayed sharp, locked onto the task at hand. Serve the eviction notice, move on. As he pulled into the cracked driveway of a once beautiful townhouse now sagging with time, the plan seemed simple. Knock on the door, deliver the notice, and leave. But nothing about what happened next was simple. The door creaked open to reveal two small girls, eyes wide, their expressions filled with uncertainty and fear. No older than 6 or 7, they stared up at him as if he were a specter. "Is your mother home?" Victor asked, his voice dropping in surprise. The older girl, standing tall despite her obvious fear, shook her head. "She said she'd be back last week." Before Victor could respond, the younger girl, her lip trembling, took a step forward. "Please don't take our home," she pleaded. "We're waiting for Mommy. She said Mr. Langston would help us if anything went wrong." Victor's heart skipped a beat. The name struck him like a punch. "What did you say?" he asked, suddenly more gentle than he had intended. The older girl pulled a crumpled envelope from her pocket, her hands shaking. She handed it to him without a word. Victor opened it right there on the porch. His eyes widened as he read the note. "Victor, if you're reading this, it means I'm gone. I didn't want to ask you like this, but they have no one else. Their names are Lily and Laya. Please take care of them." The name on the letter, Elena, pulled him back into a past he thought he had buried long ago. Victor's mind raced as he processed the words on the crumpled note. Elena. The name sent a cold shiver down his spine, dredging up memories of a time long buried. He had met her years ago, in his early days as a real estate investor. She had been a tenant in one of his first buildings, a woman full of life, warm, stubborn, and full of fire. They shared a few months together, brief but beautiful, before he left for bigger opportunities. He had told himself it was just timing. He had told himself it was business. But now, looking at the two girls in front of him, everything felt like a cruel twist of fate. Victor knelt down in front of the girls, his voice softer than he had ever imagined. "Where's your mom now?" he asked, though he already knew the answer. Laya, the younger of the two, stepped forward, her eyes wide with innocence and fear. "She said she had to go fix something," she whispered, her voice cracking. "She never came back." Victor felt the air around him grow thick with a heavy silence. He stepped into the apartment, a place that looked like it had been forgotten by the world. The rooms were empty, save for the two small beds and a few half-eaten cereal boxes. There were no toys, no signs of life, just the quiet hum of a place that had once been a home. The fridge bore a note, written hastily, reminding the girls how to heat up leftovers. The faint scent of lavender clung to the air, masking the desperation that hung like a cloud. Victor's heart clenched. The eviction notice that had once seemed so simple now felt like a distant memory. He looked at the two girls, huddled together, and felt a sudden surge of protectiveness. They were alone, and somehow he had become their lifeline. "What happened to your mom?" Victor asked, though the answer didn't matter anymore. He had already decided he wasn't leaving them. Not now. Not ever. The girls, trembling but trusting, stayed silent. Victor, his mind still reeling, reached for his phone. He called a private investigator, his voice firm. "Find her. Now!" Victor sat in his penthouse that night, his mind a whirlwind of thoughts and emotions. He stared at the photo in his hands, the one of him and Elena, taken years ago in a little coffee shop. He could still remember the warmth of her hand on his chest, the feeling of her in his arms. It was a time before he'd buried himself in business, before his life had become nothing but deals, deadlines, and empty nights. Elena had been a part of his past he'd locked away in a corner of his mind, never to return. Or so he thought. He had moved on, telling himself it was just timing, just business. But now, as the note from Elena weighed heavily in his hands, everything he'd buried was resurfacing. Lily and Laya. His thoughts kept returning to them. He hadn't asked for this. They weren't his responsibility. But then why did he feel a pull in his chest every time he saw them? Why, when he looked at their wide eyes and fragile hands, did he feel like they were already a part of him? Victor called every hospital in the area that night. No record of Elena. He refused to believe it. She couldn't just vanish. So he made the call that would change everything. A private investigator. Find her, he ordered, his voice low, almost desperate. And keep this quiet. As he hung up, a cold weight settled in his stomach. What if it was too late? What if she was gone for good? The uncertainty gnawed at him as he paced around his apartment, unable to sit still. For the first time in years, he felt something he couldn't ignore. Guilt. Regret. The kind of emotions he had long suppressed, buried under his empire of success. The investigator called the next night, her voice soft but firm. "Victor," she said, "I found Elena. She's in a coma. A car crash. No ID on her. She's been in a county hospital for almost 3 weeks under Jane Doe status." Victor's heart sank. She had been alive this whole time. He hadn't known, and now it was almost too late. The weight of that truth hit him like a ton of bricks. Victor arrived at the hospital that night, his mind a storm of worry and confusion. As he walked into the dimly lit ICU, the sterile smell of antiseptic filled his nostrils, but it did little to mask the suffocating sense of dread hanging in the air. He could feel his heart pounding in his chest as he approached the nurse's desk, but the moment he stepped into the room, everything around him seemed to freeze. There, in the bed before him, was Elena. The once vibrant woman he had known was now lying still, her face bruised, her body hooked to tubes and machines. Her dark hair was tangled, and the softness he remembered from her was replaced by the harsh reality of injury and time. His breath hitched in his throat, and for a moment, he couldn't bring himself to move. How had he missed this? How had he let her slip away without ever looking back? But despite the tubes, despite the bruises, he recognized her. She was still there, somewhere deep within that stillness. He pulled a chair next to her bed and sat down, watching the rhythmic beeping of the machines. His fingers trembled as he reached out and took her hand in his, the same hand he had once held so gently, back in the days when their lives had felt so full of possibility. "I'm sorry," he whispered softly, though he wasn't sure she could hear him. "I should have stayed. I never should have left you." There was no response, only the sound of the machines and the occasional shuffle of footsteps in the hall. Victor felt a wave of guilt wash over him, drowning out the cold, clinical air of the hospital room. His mind wandered back to the girls, to Lily and Laya. He'd promised Elena he would take care of them, but now, standing at the edge of this dark truth, he wasn't sure what that even meant anymore. As the hours dragged on, Victor couldn't tear his eyes away from Elena's face. The woman who had once been his whole world, now lying here, broken. Would she wake up? And if she did, would there be anything left for her? Would there be room for him? Days passed, but the silence in the ICU was the same. Elena's condition remained critical, and Victor found himself trapped in an endless loop of guilt and questions. He visited her every day, sitting by her side, talking to her, even though she remained unresponsive. Each conversation felt like a thread in a tapestry he was desperately trying to weave, hoping she would hear him, hoping she would wake up. But the only response was the steady beep of the heart monitor, a cold reminder of how fragile life had become. Then the call came. The private investigator had news, but it wasn't the kind of news Victor had hoped for. The DNA results had come through. His hands trembled as he opened the envelope. He stared at the words, the clarity of them cutting through the haze in his mind. Biological father, not a match. He felt the world shift beneath him. For a fleeting moment, his knees gave way, and he sat down hard on the nearest chair. He wasn't their father. Not biologically, at least. The realization hit him like a wave crashing against jagged rocks. But in the next breath, something else stirred within him, an unexpected sense of relief. It didn't change anything. He wasn't their father by blood, but the bond he had begun to form with Lily and Laya didn't need blood to hold it together. Victor stood up, walking over to Elena's bed, his heart pounding in his chest. The weight of the truth wasn't about to break him, not when there was still so much to do. The girls were his responsibility now, regardless of biology. He couldn't let them down. The next morning, he gathered the girls into his arms and whispered words he had never thought he would say. "I'm not your real dad, but I promise you, I'm not going anywhere." And in that moment, as they clung to him, Victor realized the truth. The family he never expected had been waiting for him all along, and this time, he wasn't walking away. This time, he was staying. Victor woke up the next morning to the sound of tiny footsteps padding down the hallway, followed by a soft giggle. He blinked, momentarily disoriented, as the sunlight filtered through the blinds, casting a golden glow across his penthouse kitchen. The day had begun in a way he never imagined, pouring cereal into bowls for two little girls in fleece blankets, their eyes still heavy with sleep. His suit was gone, replaced by a t-shirt and sweatpants, his carefully maintained routine disrupted by this new, unpredictable life. As he stirred the milk, the reality of it all settled in. He had become their guardian, their protector, and he wasn't sure he even knew how to be that. Lily and Laya, once strangers to him, now felt like his own. There was an unspoken bond between them, a trust he hadn't earned yet, but one they had given him without hesitation. The girls sat quietly at the counter, wrapped in their blankets, their eyes wide with curiosity, yet tinged with wariness. They didn't ask questions. They simply watched him, waiting, as if they knew their world had changed overnight, but they weren't sure what that meant yet. In the silence, Victor couldn't help but marvel at their resilience. They had been through more than most children should ever have to face, and yet here they were, still holding on. As they ate, he thought about the days ahead, about Elena, and the truth that was still yet to be revealed. How long could he keep up the facade of being their father when deep down he was still trying to figure out what that meant? But there was no time to waste. The girls needed stability, even if he didn't have all the answers. Victor glanced at the calendar on the wall. Meeting, conference calls, board reviews. His life had been mapped out in tight schedules, predictable and structured. But now, nothing seemed predictable. And for the first time in years, it didn't bother him. He had a new responsibility, and this time, no more deadlines, no more rushing. It was just him, the girls, and a life that was beginning to feel like something worth living. Victor's days had blurred into a rhythm that was both foreign and comforting. He had gone from a life of high-powered meetings and crisp suits to one of making doll hair braids and supervising science projects. His penthouse, once sterile and meticulously organized, now had toys scattered across the floor, and the faint sound of piano keys echoed through the hall. It was a chaotic kind of peace, and it felt like home in a way he never expected. Lily and Laya had adjusted to their new life with surprising grace. They still looked at him with wide, trusting eyes, as if they had known all along that he would be there. But the shadows of the past still clung to them, especially when they thought no one was watching. Victor often caught Laya with her fingers wrapped tightly around a stuffed animal, or Lily glancing nervously at the door, as if she expected someone to come and take them away. He could see the fear in their faces, the fear of abandonment, and it made his chest tighten every time. One evening, as they were sitting together on the couch, a soft knock on the door interrupted their calm. It was the investigator again. The news wasn't good. "Victor," she said quietly, her tone heavy. "Elena's condition hasn't improved. She's conscious now, but her memory is still a mess. She doesn't remember much, just bits and pieces. And," she hesitated, "I found something else." Victor's stomach churned. "What is it?" The investigator handed him a folder, her eyes filled with something he couldn't quite read. "The girls' birth certificates," she said softly. "Elena's sister passed away during childbirth. These girls, they're not your nieces. They're her daughters. Your daughters." Victor froze, the world around him pausing for a heartbeat. He hadn't been their biological father, but the way his heart twisted in that moment, the raw and overwhelming flood of emotion, told him everything he needed to know. He was their father now, by choice, by love, by everything that truly mattered, and nothing would change that. Victor stood in the doorway, watching the girls play in the living room, their laughter echoing through the space like music. For the first time in months, he felt like he was breathing again, really breathing. His world had shifted, but somehow it felt more aligned than ever before. There was still a part of him that couldn't shake the uncertainty, but every time he looked at Lily and Laya, The knot in his stomach unraveled just a little more. They were safe. They were his now, in a way that went beyond blood, beyond biology. He'd watched them grow more comfortable in the days that followed, their trust in him building with each passing moment. There were still times when Lily would retreat into herself, or when Laya's eyes would wander to the door, but they were learning to settle into their new life. And so was he. But then came the day the investigator returned, her expression grave, her words heavy. Victor had already known that there would be more to this story. He just hadn't expected it to be this. "Victor, there's something you need to hear," she began, her voice quiet. "I've been digging into Elena's past, into her family. She didn't just leave the girls in a car accident." She paused, meeting his gaze. "Elena was trying to escape from someone." Victor's heart dropped. He had always known there were things Elena hadn't shared, but he never imagined it was something like this. "She was running from an abusive relationship," the investigator continued, her tone soft but firm. "She never told you about him, did she?" Victor shook his head, stunned. Elena had always been strong, independent. The idea of her being a victim was unfathomable. And yet, as the investigator spoke, it all made sense. The missed calls, the vague answers, the nights Elena had disappeared, she had been trying to protect them. Protect him. Victor's hands clenched at his sides. He felt a surge of anger, at himself, at the circumstances, at the unfairness of it all. But it wasn't just anger. It was resolve. He had promised Elena that he would take care of her girls. And now, more than ever, he knew what he had to do. He wasn't just their guardian. He was their protector. And nothing was going to take that from him. The weeks passed, and Victor's life became a strange mixture of warmth and quiet chaos. He had never imagined his world would look like this. Tucking Lily and Laya into bed, helping them with homework, taking them to the park on weekends. But every night, as he lay awake in the silence of his grand penthouse, he couldn't shake the feeling that something was missing. There was still a distance between them, a barrier that he couldn't quite bridge, despite all the good intentions in the world. It wasn't until one evening, as they sat down for dinner, that it all changed. The girls were eating their food quietly, as they always did, but there was an air of tension about them. Victor could feel it, but he didn't know what it was until Lily suddenly looked up, her eyes wide and full of emotion. "Victor?" she asked softly, her voice tremulous. Are you going to stay with us? For real?" Victor paused, his fork halfway to his mouth. His heart tightened. The question, so simple yet so loaded, had a weight that threatened to crush him. He had been doing his best, but had he really made them feel safe? Had he done enough to erase the fear that still lingered in their eyes? He put down his fork, wiped his mouth with a napkin, and looked at them both, Lily's soft, earnest face and Laya's wide, questioning eyes. They were waiting for an answer that would give them the security they so desperately needed. And in that moment, Victor realized that his role in their lives wasn't just about providing shelter or food. It was about being a constant, a steady presence they could trust, no matter what. "I'm not going anywhere," he said softly, his voice thick with emotion. "You both are my family now. I'm not leaving. I promise you." The room was quiet for a long moment. And then, as if a weight had been lifted from their tiny shoulders, Lily smiled. It was a small, hesitant smile, but it was enough. Laya followed, her eyes brimming with unshed tears, and for the first time in what felt like forever, Victor felt something shift inside him. He wasn't just a guardian. He was their father now, in every sense that truly mattered. And with that realization, everything else fell into place. The days had begun to blur into one another, a quiet rhythm of small joys and small struggles. Victor found himself embracing a life he never thought he'd live. Driving to school drop-offs, arranging playdates, and listening to the girls as they giggled and whispered secrets late into the night. His once perfectly curated existence was now filled with the soft sound of children's laughter, the occasional tantrum, and the endless cycle of bedtime routines. And through it all, something in Victor was shifting, deep down. He was starting to feel whole in a way he never had before. But nothing prepared him for the day the call came. His phone buzzed at the most inconvenient moment, just as he was walking the girls home from their favorite ice cream shop. It was the investigator again, her voice uncharacteristically somber. "Victor, we found her." she said, and for a brief moment, time stood still. Elena, she's awake. But there's something you need to know. Victor's heart raced as he found a quiet spot on the curb, the weight of his own breath too much to handle. What happened? He managed to ask, his voice tight. She remembers you, the investigator continued, but she doesn't remember everything. There's more, Victor. There's something I didn't expect to find. Victor didn't hear the rest. He was already thinking of her, Elena, alive. He'd spent so many sleepless nights wondering if he'd ever hear her voice again, never imagining that he'd be standing here on the edge of an uncertain truth. By the time he reached the hospital, the anxiety gnawing at him felt like a force all its own. He hadn't prepared for this. He hadn't prepared for the guilt, the confusion, the flood of old feelings that now rushed back like a tidal wave. But there was one thing he knew. He had to see her, to understand what had happened. He couldn't let her slip away again, not like this. The moment he entered her room, it felt like time finally caught up. Elena was lying there, still and fragile, her face pale and bruised. Yet when her eyes fluttered open, meeting his gaze, a surge of recognition passed between them. He stepped closer, his voice trembling as he whispered, "I'm here. I'm sorry I wasn't here before." And for the first time in that sterile hospital room, Victor allowed himself to hope.